The Harris house stood at the far end of a quiet lane, a place where the world seemed to slow down. The walls were lined with old photographs, their colors faded, their frames slightly tilted, like memories that had grown tired with time. The evening light slipped in through tall windows, laying soft stripes of gold across the carpet. In the small bedroom at the back, Maria sat beside an old man's bed. Mr. Harris was 84 and frail, his hands pale and thin like paper. His eyes were closed, but Maria knew he wasn't fully asleep. He was drifting somewhere between dreams and wakefulness, a place he often visited these days. Maria worked as his caregiver, coming every afternoon and staying until late at night. It wasn't an easy job, but it wasn't hard for her either, not in the way people expected. She had looked after her own grandmother years ago, and something about caring for the elderly felt natural to her. She knew when they needed water without being told, when they were in pain even if they stayed silent, and when they simply wanted someone to sit near them so they didn't feel alone. Tonight was one of the quieter nights. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the air cool and smelling faintly of wet earth. The only sound in the room was the steady tick of the clock on the wall. Maria adjusted Mr. Harris's blanket, tucking it gently under his chin. His breathing was slow, but every now and then it caught, as if he were trying to speak but thought better of it. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a small knitted shawl. She had made it herself in pale blue, the same color as the sea, on a calm day. It wasn't part of her job, but she liked to bring little things to make the old man's room feel warmer. She placed it over his shoulders and sat back down. After a moment, she began to hum. It was a tune she had carried since childhood, something her grandmother used to sing while preparing dinner in their small kitchen. The melody was simple and soft, wrapping around the room like a gentle blanket. She didn't sing loudly, just enough so that the sound floated through the air like a whisper. Mr. Harris stirred. His eyelids fluttered open for a second, and Maria noticed the faintest smile touch his lips. It was the kind of smile that said he was somewhere far away, remembering something only he could see. "Is that—" he began, his voice hoarse from disuse. "It's just a little song," Maria said softly. "Something my grandmother taught me." He closed his eyes again, the smile still lingering. She kept humming, watching the way the lines on his face seemed to relax, as if the music had smoothed away years of worry. Maria had always believed music could do things medicine couldn't. She didn't know exactly why, but it could make people remember moments they had forgotten, or feel comfort when nothing else worked. In this room, the lullaby seemed to connect two lives, hers and his, like a thread tying past and present together. The rocking chair in the corner gave a slow creak as she shifted her weight. Outside the window, the garden was dark except for the silver light of the moon touching the leaves. She liked nights like this, quiet, unhurried. They made her feel that time wasn't something to race against, but something to share. Maria didn't notice the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. She was focused entirely on the old man, leaning forward a little as she sang. The door was open just a crack, letting the hallway light spill onto the floor in a narrow line. Somewhere beyond that door, a figure stood still, listening. But Maria didn't see him. She thought about how Mr. Harris's son rarely visited. She'd seen a photograph once, a tall man in a suit, standing beside his father in what looked like a busy city square. They both looked younger, happier. Maria had wondered if they still spoke, but she never asked. It wasn't her place. Her job was to care for Mr. Harris, not to pry into his family matters. The old man's hand moved slightly on the bedspread, and Maria instinctively reached out, letting his fingers curl loosely around hers. His skin was cool, his grip faint, but present. She smiled without realizing it. "You can rest now," she whispered. The clock ticked on. The house was still, as if holding its breath to listen to the soft song in the back room. Maria kept humming until her voice turned into a quiet murmur, her eyes watching over her patient with the kind of care that couldn't be taught. It had to be felt. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about her long shift or the bus ride home, or the dinner she hadn't eaten yet. She was simply there, in the present, sharing a quiet evening with an old man who needed someone to be with him. Outside, in the hallway, Alex Harris stood frozen. He had come back after years away, expecting to find his father alone or cared for by strangers who treated it like a chore. But the voice he heard was nothing like that. He didn't step inside. Not yet. He just stood there, listening to the melody float through the air, wondering why it felt like it was meant for both of them. Alex Harris had not planned to arrive quietly. When he drove up the long gravel path to his father's house, the sound of the car engine and the crunch of the tires were enough to announce his presence. But as he stepped inside, suitcase in hand, the house felt different, quieter, almost like it was holding a secret. He had been away for so long that the familiar creak of the front door felt like a voice from the past. The faint smell of wood polish and old books filled the air. Everything looked almost the same as he remembered. Paintings in their original spots, the worn rug in the hallway, the tall grandfather clock ticking steadily against the wall. But the silence wasn't the empty silence he had expected. Somewhere, deeper in the house, there was a sound, soft, slow, and unlike anything he had imagined he'd hear that night. It was a woman's voice, humming. Alex froze. He knew his father had a caregiver. Their conversations over the years had been short and mostly through his father's lawyer or doctor. He had heard her name, Maria, but nothing more. He had pictured someone distant, professional, coming and going without much connection. Yet the sound he heard now was different. It wasn't just a song. It was gentle, warm, the kind of sound you didn't make for strangers. You made it for someone you cared about. His steps slowed as he followed the sound down the hallway. He stopped just short of the slightly open bedroom door. The light from inside spilled out in a thin golden line across the dark floorboards. Through the small gap, he could see her. Maria sat close to the bed, her posture relaxed but attentive. His father lay against the pillows, wrapped in a blanket, eyes half closed. She wasn't speaking, just humming a tune so soft that Alex had to lean forward to catch it. The kind of tune that made the world outside seem far away. For a moment, Alex felt like an outsider in his own house. He had spent years abroad, chasing business deals and building a fortune that kept him far from home. The last time he had seen his father was at a hospital visit 2 years ago, and it had been brief, almost awkward. They hadn't fought, at least not in the traditional sense, but there had been a distance between them, built slowly over the years until it felt permanent. Now, standing there, Alex felt something he couldn't name. His father's face, usually so withdrawn, looked different, softer. There was the faintest smile on his lips. His thin hands rested gently on top of the blanket, one of them loosely holding Maria's. Alex's eyes narrowed slightly. Caregivers didn't usually hold hands with their patients, at least not in the way she did. This wasn't just medical care. This was personal. He stayed quiet, leaning slightly against the wall so the floorboards wouldn't creak. Maria didn't notice him. She kept humming, her thumb brushing lightly against his father's hand in a slow, comforting motion. Alex couldn't remember the last time he had seen someone look at his father that way. Not pitying, not impatient, just present. Fully there. Something about it stirred old memories. He remembered being a boy, sitting in the living room while his mother sang softly in the kitchen, her voice drifting through the open door. Back then, the house had been filled with warmth. There had been laughter, shared meals, long conversations in front of the fireplace. But after she passed away, the house had changed. His father had changed. And Alex had buried himself in his work, thinking that distance was easier than grief. He shifted slightly, and the floor made a faint creak. Maria glanced toward the door for the briefest second, but then returned her gaze to Mr. Harris, as if deciding it was just the house settling. Alex's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. She was younger than he expected, maybe in her late 20s, with a calmness about her that seemed out of place in this restless world. She didn't seem hurried or distracted. She wasn't checking her phone or watching the clock. She was simply there. The song faded into silence. Maria adjusted the blanket around Mr. Harris, smoothing it down with care. "You should sleep now," she said softly. His father murmured something Alex couldn't hear, and Maria leaned closer, listening with patience. She gave a small nod, then sat back again, her hand still in his. Alex's grip tightened slightly on his suitcase handle. He had come here to discuss practical matters, his father's health, the property, the legal papers that needed signing. But now, watching from the hallway, those things felt strangely unimportant. Instead, he found himself wondering, who was this woman who could bring peace to a man who had been unreachable for years? Maria eventually rose from her chair and began tidying the bedside table, arranging the water glass, adjusting the lamp so the light wasn't too bright, placing a small book neatly back in its spot. Her movements were quiet but deliberate, as if every detail mattered. Alex stepped back, careful not to make a sound as she moved toward the door. If she saw him now, he didn't want to explain why he was standing there like a thief in his own house. He wanted to understand first. Maria turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint hallway light to fall across his father's peaceful face. She paused, looking at him one last time before stepping out into the hall. Alex slipped into the shadows just far enough that she didn't notice him as she walked past. Only when she disappeared into the kitchen did he return to the bedroom doorway. He stood there for a long moment, looking at his father. Mr. Harris seemed more at ease than Alex had seen in years. It was as if the song had reached a place deep inside him that words never could. Alex exhaled slowly. Something told him that whatever he had planned for this visit was about to change. The morning sunlight slipped gently into the room, landing on the pale curtains and casting a warm glow across the floor. The old house always felt different in the early hours, quiet but not empty, as if the walls themselves were waking up. Maria arrived just as she always did, carrying her small canvas bag. Inside were the usual things: a thermos of tea, a notebook, some knitting yarn, and a tin of soft biscuits Mr. Harris liked. She stepped inside and hung her coat on the hook near the door. When she reached the bedroom, she found Mr. Harris already awake. He was staring at the ceiling, his face thoughtful, as though he were chasing a memory that refused to stay still. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," Maria said warmly. He turned his head toward her, eyes blinking slowly. "Morning." His voice was faint, but there was something different about it, more alert than usual. She set the biscuits down on the bedside table and opened the curtains a little wider to let the sun in. The light touched his face, and for a second she saw him as he might have looked years ago, before age and illness had slowed him down. Maria pulled up the chair beside his bed. "You're up early today. Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head, slightly. "Had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream." Maria smiled. "What was it about?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Your song. The one you were humming last night." Maria tilted her head. "It's an old tune my grandmother used to sing. Did it sound familiar?" His lips curved into a faint smile. "My wife used to sing something like that many years ago. It's been so long since I heard it." I almost forgot what it felt like. Maria's eyes softened. She didn't know much about his late wife, only that her passing had left a deep silence in this house. Maybe that's why. It came back to you, she said gently. Some memories don't go away completely. They just wait for the right moment. He nodded slowly, his eyes distant, as if looking at something only he could see. I could see her, not as she was at the end, but younger, laughing. She was wearing that blue dress she loved. Maria listened without interrupting. She had learned that with people like Mr. Harris, every memory shared was like finding a hidden piece of their story. Out in the hallway, unseen by either of them, Alex had paused again. He had been walking toward the kitchen, but stopped when he heard his father's voice, clearer than it had been in years. He leaned against the wall, listening. Alex's father rarely spoke about his mother. The few times he had, his words had been short, almost guarded. Hearing him now, describing her with such tenderness, caught Alex off guard. "Did I ever tell you how we met?" Mr. Harris asked Maria suddenly. "No," she said, leaning forward slightly. "She was working at a little bookstore. I came in looking for a map, but I walked out with a book I didn't need, and her smile stuck in my head for weeks. I went back 3 times before I had the courage to ask her to dinner." Maria smiled. "Sounds like something from a story." He chuckled softly, a sound so rare that Alex felt a strange ache in his chest just hearing it. "That night," Mr. Harris continued, "she wore that blue dress. I never told her, but it became my favorite thing she owned. Every time she wore it, I felt like I was seeing her for the first time again." Maria's voice was quiet but warm. It must have been a beautiful dress. He looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't just the dress. It was her. Everything she was. Maria's fingers curled lightly around the edge of the blanket. She wasn't sure what to say, so she just let the silence sit comfortably between them. From the hallway, Alex's thoughts were tangled. He had almost forgotten the sound of his father speaking with such feeling. In recent years, their conversations had been about doctors, medication, and bills. Nothing personal. Nothing like this. When Maria finally stood, she adjusted his pillows and made sure he had water within reach. "Would you like me to sing again tonight?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, please. I'd like that." She gave a small smile. "Then I'll make sure of it." After she left the room, Alex stepped quietly into the doorway. His father looked over, blinking as if surprised to see him. "Alex," he said softly. "Hi, Dad," Alex replied, stepping inside. He set his phone on the table, unsure what else to do with his hands. "You're up early." "I was just talking to Maria," his father said. "She reminds me of your mother in a way." Alex wasn't sure how to respond. "I heard you talking about her. About the bookstore." His father's eyes softened. Those were good days. Alex sat in the chair Maria had left. "I didn't know that story." "You never asked," his father said, but there was no sharpness in his tone, only quiet truth. They sat there for a few minutes, the sunlight warming the room. Alex wanted to ask more, about the blue dress, about the laughter, about everything his father had kept to himself all these years, but the words stayed caught in his throat. When Maria returned with tea, she found them sitting together, neither speaking but both strangely at ease. She set the tray down and poured the tea, her movements gentle. Alex noticed how his father's eyes followed her with quiet trust. It made him wonder how much he had missed by staying away. For the next few days, Alex stayed in the house longer than he had planned. He told himself it was because there were papers to look over, medical updates to review, and a few repairs to check on. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the whole truth. He was curious. He wanted to see how Maria worked, how she had somehow managed to make his father more at ease than Alex had seen in years. From the first morning after his arrival, He began to notice things. Not the big, obvious things like giving medicine or checking blood pressure. Any trained caregiver could do that. It was the small things she did that caught his attention. Maria always came in quietly, never rushing, never startling his father. She carried a small bag with her, and there was always something extra inside. A new book for reading aloud, a tin of homemade biscuits, sometimes even fresh flowers from her own garden. She never mentioned where these things came from. She just placed them in the room as naturally as breathing. When she made tea, she didn't just pour it and walk away. She tested the temperature first, making sure it wasn't too hot or too cold. She knew exactly how much milk his father liked, just enough to turn the tea a pale gold. She spoke to Mr. Harris as if he were an old friend, not a patient. She told him about the weather, about the neighbor's cat that liked to sit on the garden wall, about a little boy she'd seen at the bus stop who had been chasing leaves in the wind. These weren't grand stories, but they made the room feel alive. Alex found himself watching from a distance more than once, sometimes from the hallway, sometimes from the corner of the living room when they moved there for sunlight in the afternoons. He saw how Maria never rushed through the day. She didn't check her phone constantly, didn't keep looking at the clock. She seemed to have all the time in the world for whatever his father wanted, whether that was to talk, to sit in silence, or simply to hold her hand. One afternoon, Alex saw her kneeling beside the old bookshelf, dusting the spines of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. "Do you want me to read this one to you later?" she asked his father, holding up a worn copy of Treasure Island. His father's eyes lit up faintly. "I read that to Alex when he was a boy." Maria smiled. "Then maybe you can read it to me this time." Alex, listening from the doorway, felt an unexpected pang in his chest. He remembered those evenings faintly, his father reading while he curled up on the couch, his mother sitting nearby with her knitting. He had forgotten how safe the house had once felt. The change in his father was subtle, but real. There was more light in his eyes. He seemed to listen more, speak more, even. His silences felt softer, less heavy. One evening after Maria left, Alex sat with his father in the living room. The fireplace was unlit, but the two lamps cast a warm glow. "She's good with you," Alex said quietly. His father looked at him, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "She's more than good. She cares. That's not something you can pay for." Alex thought about that for a moment. In his world, almost everything had a price. Services, time, even friendships sometimes. But here, in this quiet house, there was something different, something freely given. The next day, he saw Maria in the kitchen, slicing apples into a neat bowl. She glanced up when she noticed him. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Harris?" she asked politely. "Alex," he corrected gently. "Call me Alex." She gave a small nod, her eyes warm but cautious. "All right, Alex. Tea?" He hesitated. "Sure." They sat at the small kitchen table while the kettle boiled. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the biscuits she had baked earlier. "You've been looking after my father for a while," Alex said after a pause. "Almost 2 years," she replied. "That long?" "Yes. I started coming 3 days a week. Then his health needed more care, so it became every day." There was no pride in her voice, no sense of self-importance. It was simply the truth. Alex nodded slowly. "He seems different lately. Better." Maria's smile was small but genuine. "He has good days and bad days, but when someone feels safe, they tend to have more good ones." Her words stayed with him. Later that night, Alex found himself thinking about them as he stood by the window, looking out at the dark garden. The moonlight touched the leaves, and somewhere in the house, he could hear Maria humming again while she settled his father in bed. It struck him that she wasn't doing anything extraordinary, not in a way the world would notice. But maybe that was the extraordinary part. For so long, Alex had measured worth in achievements, in numbers, in deals closed. But Maria was showing him something quieter, something he hadn't thought about in years, that the smallest acts could sometimes matter the most. The next morning, he made a decision. He didn't know exactly what it would mean yet, but he knew he needed to spend more time here, in this house, with his father, and with the woman who had somehow brought warmth back into their lives. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of roses from the garden. The Harris garden had once been his mother's pride, a place of neat hedges, colorful flowers, and winding stone paths. In the years after she passed, it had lost some of its order, but it still held a quiet beauty, especially in the early light. Maria liked to bring Mr. Harris outside whenever the weather allowed. She said the fresh air helped him rest better at night. That morning, she had wrapped him in a thick blanket and settled him into a cushioned chair under the old oak tree. Alex watched from the kitchen window as she adjusted the blanket, making sure it didn't slip from his father's shoulders. She placed a small table beside him with tea and a plate of apple slices. Her movements were patient, unhurried. When his father closed his eyes to enjoy the sunlight, Maria stepped back, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she turned toward the garden's edge. She knelt to pull a few weeds from the flower bed, humming softly to herself. Alex decided to join her. He stepped out the back door, the wooden boards of the porch creaking under his weight. Maria looked up as he approached, brushing dirt from her hands. "Morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, straightening up. He nodded toward his father. "He looks comfortable." "Yes," she said with a small smile. "It's a good day for him." For a moment they stood in silence, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Alex wasn't used to quiet conversations. In his world, meetings were filled with fast words and sharper tones. This slower rhythm felt strange, but not unpleasant. "You seem to know exactly what he needs," he said finally. Maria shrugged lightly. "You learn after a while. Every person is different. Some like talking, some prefer silence. Some need to be reminded of who they are every day. Others just need someone to sit beside them." He glanced at her, curious. "Why do you do this work?" She looked at him for a moment as if deciding how much to share. Then she turned her eyes back to the flower bed. "Because I know what it's like to feel forgotten." Alex was quiet, waiting. "My grandmother raised me," Maria continued. "She was the kindest person I knew. When she got sick, I took care of her. People didn't visit much. Everyone said they were busy, but I think they just didn't know what to say to her anymore. She used to tell me, even if the mind forgets, the heart remembers kindness." Alex felt the words settle in the air between them. "That's why you're so patient with him," he said. She gave a small nod. "He may not remember me every day, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how he feels in the moment. If he feels safe, if he feels cared for, then I've done my job." Alex looked toward his father. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly toward the sun. The blanket around him shifted with each slow breath. "You've given him something I couldn't," Alex said quietly. Maria shook her head. "It's not about what you can or can't give. You're his son. You carry his memories in a way no one else can. I just help make the days a little lighter." They walked slowly along the stone path, the grass damp under their shoes. Maria pointed out a cluster of yellow roses that had just begun to bloom. "These were your mother's favorite, weren't they?" she asked. Alex blinked. "Yes." "How? Did you know?" "Your father told me once," she said simply. He remembered it very clearly that day. Something in Alex's chest tightened. His father rarely spoke of his mother anymore, and hearing that he had shared that memory with Maria made Alex realize how much trust his father had in her. They stopped near the far edge of the garden, where the fence was covered in climbing ivy. Alex leaned against it, watching Maria as she bent to pick a small weed from between the stones. "You know," he said, "most people wouldn't stay in a job like this for long. It's not easy." She straightened, brushing her hands again. "It's not supposed to be easy. But it's simple. Treat people with kindness, and you give them dignity. That's worth more than anything else." Alex didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, seeing not just a caregiver, but someone who carried her work like a calling. They walked back toward the oak tree. His father's eyes were open now, watching them approach. "Did you two solve the world's problems?" Mr. Harris asked, his voice carrying a faint trace of humor. "Not yet," Maria replied with a smile. "But we made progress." Alex sat beside his father, and Maria poured more tea into his cup. She didn't hover or fuss. She simply placed the cup within easy reach and stepped back. The three of them sat together in the garden, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. For once, Alex felt no need to check his phone, no urge to think about work. In that quiet moment, he understood something he hadn't before. Kindness wasn't just about big gestures. It was about showing up again and again, in small ways that left a lasting mark. And Maria, he realized, had been doing exactly that for his father. The day began like any other. The sky was pale blue, with soft clouds drifting lazily above the Harris house. Maria arrived in the late afternoon, her usual bag over her shoulder, a thermos of tea inside. She greeted Alex in the hallway, and he gave her a small nod, though his face seemed more tired than usual. When Maria entered the bedroom, Mr. Harris was resting quietly. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was slow but steady. She placed her bag on the chair and adjusted the blanket over him. "Good evening, Mr. Harris," she said softly. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment he looked directly at her. "You're here," he murmured. "Of course," she replied with a gentle smile. "I told you I'd come." She poured him a cup of tea, but he only took a small sip before resting back again. There was a calmness about him that was different, softer, almost like someone who had made peace with something. They spoke a little, though his words came slower than usual. He asked her to hum the song again, the one that reminded him of his wife. She did, her voice quiet, filling the room with the familiar melody. Alex lingered in the doorway for a few minutes before stepping back into the hall. He didn't want to interrupt, but something about the moment kept him close. Later that evening, Maria noticed his breathing change. It was still steady but lighter somehow. She checked his hand. It was warm, but his grip was weaker than before. She stayed beside him, holding his hand in both of hers. "Maria," he whispered suddenly. "I'm here," she said. "You've been very kind to me. Thank you." Her eyes softened. "It's been my honor." He gave her a small smile. "Tell Alex. I'm proud of him." Maria nodded, her throat tight. "I will." Not long after, his breathing grew slower. His eyes drifted shut and the faint smile stayed on his face. Maria didn't move. She sat with him through the quiet minutes that followed until the stillness became complete. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alex came in quietly, his footsteps barely making a sound. He stopped beside the bed, his eyes moving from his father's face to Maria's. She looked at him with a silent understanding. "He went peacefully," she said softly. Alex stood there for a long moment, taking it in. His father's expression was calm, almost serene. It was nothing like the restless, tired look Alex remembered from past years. Maria stayed until everything had been taken care of. She didn't rush to leave. She made sure the blanket was neatly in place, the teacup was moved from the bedside, and the lamp was turned low. She treated the moment with the same care she had given every day she had been there. When she finally stepped out into the living room, Alex was sitting on the couch, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He looked up at her. "Thank you," he said quietly. She shook her head. "There's no need to thank me." "Yes, there is," he insisted. "You were here for him when I wasn't. You gave him peace, and I'll never forget that." Maria didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. 2 days later, after the small family service, Alex called her to meet him in his father's study. The room was filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. "I've been thinking about something," Alex began. "You've spent years caring for one person, making their life better in ways most people don't see. I want to give you a chance to do that for more people." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "My father left me a part of his estate," Alex explained. "I've decided to use some of it to start a charitable foundation, one focused on helping the elderly who don't have family or support. I want you to be part of it, not as an employee, but as someone who helps shape it from the start." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "That's a big responsibility." "I know," Alex said, his tone steady. "But I've seen what you can do. You have something money can't buy. Patience, kindness, and the ability to make people feel safe. That's exactly what the foundation needs." She was quiet for a long moment. "Why me?" "Because you changed my father's last years," Alex replied, "and you changed me. I want this foundation to carry that forward." Maria's hands rested in her lap as she thought about it. She had never imagined doing something beyond one-on-one care. But the thought of helping many people, of giving them the same sense of dignity she had given Mr. Harris, filled her with a quiet sense of purpose. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Alex smiled faintly, relief in his expression. "Good. We'll start soon. But take your time. Rest. You've earned it." When she left the study that day, Maria stepped into the garden. The roses were in bloom again, their yellow petals bright in the sunlight. She stood there for a moment, letting the breeze touch her face. Somewhere in her heart, she felt as though Mr. Harris was still here, watching, approving. She whispered softly, "I'll make you proud." Samuel woke up before sunrise. He sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. Today was the day the social workers would give their decision. By the end of the day, he would either be Lily's legal guardian or she would be taken away. He glanced toward the couch, where Lily still slept peacefully under a blanket, her little arm draped over Mr. Button's. She trusted him completely. The thought made his chest tighten. By 8 o'clock, Lily was awake and ready. She wore her favorite yellow sweater and a small clip in her hair shaped like a star. She didn't seem nervous at all, at least on the outside. "Are we going to see the nice lady again?" she asked as she ate her toast. "Yes," Samuel said, trying to smile. "And we're going to be honest, just like before." Lily nodded. "Okay, you'll be there the whole time, every second," he promised. At the Silverwood building, Alexander met them in the lobby. He looked sharper than usual, wearing a dark suit, but his eyes were warm when he looked at Lily. "I'm here to support you," he told Samuel quietly. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this." Samuel nodded, grateful for the words. When the meeting began, the two social workers entered with calm but serious expressions. They sat across the table from Samuel and Alexander, with Lily in a small chair beside Samuel. "We've reviewed all the information," one of them began, "including the testimony from Lily, your documents, and the recent claim from her uncle Mark." At the mention of Mark's name, Lily's shoulders stiffened. Samuel reached under the table and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "We have to decide what will serve Lily's best interests," the other social worker continued. "This includes stability, emotional safety, and consistent care." Samuel felt every word press against his chest. Before they could speak further, the door opened, and Mark walked in. His presence made the air heavier. "I have the right to be here," Mark said, placing a folder on the table. "I have a house, a stable income, and I'm her family." Samuel stayed silent. He knew if he lost his temper, it could hurt his case. The first social worker turned to Lily. "Lily, we've heard from both Samuel and your uncle, but we want to hear from you again. Where do you feel safe? Where do you want to live?" Lily looked down at her lap for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice small but steady. "With Sam. He makes me breakfast. He reads me stories. He listens. I don't feel scared when I'm with him." Mark's jaw tightened. "You barely know him." "That's enough," Alexander cut in, his voice firm but calm. "She knows who has been here for her." The social workers exchanged quiet words, flipping through their notes. Finally, one of them looked up. "Mark, we recognize your legal connection to Lily, but we must also consider her expressed wishes and emotional well-being. At this time, we believe it is in Lily's best interest to remain with Samuel Parker as her primary guardian." The words landed like a heavy weight lifting from Samuel's shoulders. He almost didn't believe he'd heard them right. Lily's face lit up instantly. "So I get to stay?" "Yes," the social worker confirmed with a smile. "We'll finalize the paperwork this week." Mark's face darkened. "You're making a mistake," Samuel finally spoke, keeping his voice steady. "The mistake would be taking her away from the place she calls home." Mark didn't reply. He simply gathered his folder and left the room without another word. When they stepped out into the lobby, Lily threw her arms around Samuel's waist. "We did it!" she said, her voice muffled against his sweater. "We did," Samuel said softly, bending down to hug her back. Alexander smiled at the sight. "You've got a lot ahead of you, Samuel, but I think you're ready." Samuel nodded. "I don't know everything about being a dad, but I know I'll never stop trying." The rest of the day felt lighter than air. They celebrated in the simplest way, hot chocolate at the small cafe down the street. Lily stirred her drink with a spoon, her legs swinging under the table. "Do I call you Daddy now?" she asked suddenly. Samuel almost choked on his drink. "Only if you want to, kiddo." She thought for a second, then grinned. "Okay, Daddy?" The word hit him like a warm beam of sunlight. It was simple, but it meant everything. That evening, they returned to the small apartment Alexander had helped him secure. It wasn't fancy, 2 rooms, a small kitchen, but it was theirs. Lily unpacked her drawings and taped them to the walls, filling the space with color. When it was time for bed, Samuel tucked her in and sat on the edge of the bed. "Hey," he said softly, "you know life won't always be easy, right? But no matter what, I'll be here." Lily smiled sleepily. "I know. You're my safe place." Samuel swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And you're mine." She closed her eyes, drifting off with Mr. Buttons in her arms. Hours later, Samuel sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. For years, he had thought his life was small, unimportant. But now everything felt different. He wasn't just the janitor in the background anymore. He was someone's father. And as long as Lily needed him, he would keep showing up every morning, every night, for the rest of his life.